Okay, we'll make a start. So, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening for this webinar on water trading, hosted by the CIWEM East Anglian branch. So, I'm Harriet Robson. I am the chair of the CIWEM East Anglian branch and committee. I've been a member of the committee for about 3 years now and the chair since last August. So before I get into the formal introduction of this webinar, we've just got some housekeeping to go through. So this webinar will be recorded. They only put the recordings of the events up on the CIWEM website or YouTube when the speakers have given permission, and as long as there's no copyright issues. So you should be able to view this one and past events on the CIWEM YouTube. If you experience any technical issues, need any assistance, please use the chat function in this Zoom to let us know what the problem is and what help you need. We'll be taking questions at the end of the presentations. So if you would like to put a question in or make a comment about the talks, please use the Q&A facility on Zoom. So at the bottom of the screen, you'll have a Q&A button and a chat button. So put your questions and comments on the content of the talks in the Q&A, and then the chat is for if you have any technical issues with Zoom, if you can't hear us, if something's going wrong. And when you are asking questions, if you could just state who your question is for, because we've got 2 speakers with us tonight. And so this talk is 1 hour CPD, but CIWEM do not provide CPD certificates for this event. So just a little bit about the CIWEM East Anglian branch. So we had 914 members at the last count, 19 of which are international. So East Anglia traditionally covers Essex, Suffolk, Norfolk, Cambridgeshire, Bedfordshire, that sort of region, but not all the branch members are based in East Anglia. The branch is run by the committee, of which I'm the chair. We also have a secretary and a treasurer and 6 additional committee members. We've been quite quiet for the last few months, so you might not have seen or heard much from us. We've had some changes to our committee membership and officer positions. So we lost some committee members in the last year, but we've also gained some new ones, and we've had a change around of our chair and secretary and treasurer. We've been thinking up ideas for our programme this year, and like everyone else, we've just been adjusting to the global pandemic. But now we're here, kicking off our 2021 series of events with this webinar on water trading. And keep your eye out for more of our events in the coming months, because we've got some more cooking. So CIWEM obviously has switched to the virtual world and is now reaching a global audience. So for this event, for example, before the pandemic, we would have had it in person, probably at one of our Peterborough, Cambridge hubs, and some of you might not have been able to be there because of travel. I wouldn't have been able to be there because I'm not based in that area anymore. So it's really great that we can reach people locally, nationally, and internationally now through these digital events. So CIWEM made a climate and ecological declaration at the end of 2019 and are going to be holding events and activities this year that address the issues arising from that. And they'll link to the 2 COP meetings taking place this year. So there's a climate emergency COP26 in November and a biodiversity COP15 in May, which has been held in China. So keep an eye out for CIWEM running some events that are related to those. And then obviously, like this event, there's a lot of branch events going on. They can all be found on the CIWEM events page. And the past recordings of these events can also be found on the CIWEM YouTube page, as I mentioned. So there's a few more events coming up. So the next international event is in April. It's the next Flood and Coast session. And then we've got some more branch events coming up. So there's one very soon on the 10th of March, hosted by the Republic of Ireland branch, about the implementation of the Climate Action Plan for Ireland. And then we've also got a talk on the 17th by the East Midlands branch about drainage and wastewater management plans. And we have a talk on the 23rd of March by the CIWEM Central Southern branch about a method to estimate the risks to people by floods. So really encourage you to keep looking at what branch events are coming up and go and sign up for them. And then CIWEM also do development and learning courses. So there's mentor training, instructor-led e-learning. There's going to be 3 sessions coming up, one in March, one in June, and one in October. So if you're interested in CIWEM's online courses, go to the training page on the CIWEM website. So, that's an overview of our branch and what else CIWEM does. And with that housekeeping out the way, we can get down to the main event. So the topic of this webinar is something that's particularly pertinent to me. So for my day job, I work for Essex and Suffolk Water Company. I'm what they call a hydrologist in the water resources team. So my work involves monitoring, managing, modelling our surface water resources to ensure we have sufficient, resilient, reliable public water supplies. Also operate in East Anglia, there's 4 other water companies, so Anglian Water, Affinity Water, Cambridge Water, Severn Trent Water are all in the region. There's lots of farmers and agricultural abstractors, power plants, in industries, all of which require water resources. So it's really important that we share all these resources in East Anglia fairly and efficiently and sustainably. And also the whole of East Anglia has recently been classed as a seriously water stressed area by the Environment Agency. So some hard work is required to make sure we're resilient to these droughts and climate change that's predicted in our future. So as a water company, Essex and Suffolk Water, we're frequently involved in conversations regarding trade in water with our neighbouring water companies and abstraction licence holders in the region. We also receive requests for new supplies from industries and developments, for example, and there's sometimes in areas where we don't have a lot of headroom between our supply and demand at the moment. So we really need to find some better systems for trade in water in our region, because the process can sometimes be difficult and confusing. So about a year ago, the Environment Agency published what they call the National Framework for Water Resources, in which regional planning groups have to produce a plan setting out how the supply of water will be managed in the region. So East Anglia is covered by Water Resources East, which it has an ambition to make sure we have sufficient water resources through collaborative integrated water resource management. And the Water Resource East membership covers water companies, energy companies, local authorities, landowners, farmers, NGOs, universities. So all of those are working on or supporting the publication of this regional plan. And there are a lot of conversations going on in those forums about water trading. So all of these things, Water Resources East, water companies, all the abstractors in the region are really interconnected. And what we need is a clear vision on how we can improve the management and sharing of our resources now in the future. And I think we're starting to get that. We're starting to think about that. So this is probably a good place for me to introduce our speakers tonight. So first up, we're going to have Paul Bradford, who is a director at Sustainable Water Solutions. So Paul has over 20 years experience in the industry working with abstractors. So he's going to share his knowledge and experience with us regarding water trading in this region. And Paul is also a recent addition to our CIWEM East Anglian branch committee. So he's one of our own. And speaking after Paul, we have Simon Murray, who is a water market business manager at Wheatley Solutions. So I've been working with Simon on behalf of Essex and Suffolk Water on a project to improve the water trading process, which Simon will expand on about the origins and details of that project. But it's an exciting one for those of us who are involved in that field. And Simon and Paul have also worked together. So hence my earlier comment of the interconnectedness of water resources and trading in the region. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this talk, and I won't waste a second longer. So I'll pass you over now to Paul. Thank you.
Thanks, Harriet. That was a nice introduction. So yeah, my background is in water resources abstraction licensing. Prior to my current role, I worked with the agency from the mid-90s. It gives away my age a bit. And I have been involved over the years, both at a policy level and helping abstractors trying to deal with trading. So the title of this talk is Water Rights, Trading Opportunities and Obstacles. And I thought we'd be a bit positive and start with the opportunities. I'm sorry, this first page is a bit statistics heavy, but it gets better. So first of all, we have about 19,500 abstraction licenses in England. I have excluded hydropower from these stats. Nothing against hydropower. I apologise for anyone in the industry, but they do kind of skew the whole trading thing. So for the purpose of this talk, we've taken them out. Now, those 19,500 abstraction licenses authorise the abstraction of 13,869 million cubic metres of water a year. Now, of that, only about 7,500 million is abstracted. So you've got a 55% uptake. So in theory, you've got nearly 6,500 million cubic meters just locked up in the system, held in licenses, not being used. Now, back in 2010, 2013, when DEFRA were beginning to look at abstraction reform in detail, they looked at this situation and they said, well, yeah, this obviously isn't working. The whole system is restricting access to water. It's inefficient. It doesn't really reflect the economic value of water. It's certainly not encouraging abstractors to invest in water. And actually, they branded the whole system, and this is quoted from their economic impact assessment. They said this system, the current system, has become a regulatory failure. A bit harsh. I was personally a little bit offended, but they do have a point. So the solution, the proposed solution, was that they'd introduce what they called a hybrid system. So you have a regulatory system with water shares and more accessible trading. And we're working towards that at the moment. Okay, so the incentive for trading. DEFRA, in their economic assessment, estimated that the net present value of increasing trading, abstraction reform, mostly down to trading, was £447 million over 25 years. It's a lot of money, and actually it doesn't seem too far off. I mean, if you look at this, the map on the right-hand side of the screen, produced by Cranfield, it shows you that the net increase in value to agriculture as a result of the water abstraction is anything between £2 and £5. That's spray irrigation. From our own experience working with landowners and agents, the uplift in the value of land, thanks to an abstraction license, is about £1,000 per acre inch. That's farmer speak for £10 per cubic metre. We've worked with a couple of companies involved in trades, and they're happy to offer between £10 and £15 per cubic metre for a good long licence. And just looking at day-to-day trading, farmers buying water off each other across boundaries, you're looking at anything from 15 pence to 45 pence per cubic metre of water supplied to the farm. depending on how it's supplied and how much work is involved. So given that you've got, what do I say, 6,500 million cubic meters of water sloshing around, or rather frozen in abstraction licenses that aren't used, and its value is, I don't know, £10 per cubic meter of water, that's a huge amount of money. So why aren't we seeing lots more trading? These are the stats produced by the EA recently. Between 2003 and 2017, we saw 114 trades, recorded licensed trades. Now that's only 9 a year, 1 trade per every 2,250 licenses. Situation's got a little bit better recently, thanks to the agency introducing this flexible trading system. But even then, we're only looking at 59 trades, and that's across the whole of England. And actually, the numbers are going down. And to be honest, that 2018 was a bit of an exception due to some very odd regulatory things that went on that year. So why aren't we seeing more trading? Okay, now onto the obstacles. I think the first thing to bear in mind is that these unused licenses, the 45% that is just sitting in the system, is not really spare water. I'll talk a bit more about that later. You've also got obstacles in terms of the geographical or the spatial impacts of abstraction. If you take water at the bottom of a catchment, you can't really expect to move that license to the top where there's less water without a significant impact. And also the lack of market transparency. And I'm sure Simon will talk about that later. But it's very difficult to trade if you don't know what the value of your water is, you don't know where the buyers are, you don't know who the sellers are. So just going back to this issue of unused licenses, historically, we have over-licensed most of East Anglia, thanks to a fairly relaxed approach back in the 60s and 70s when we were issuing licenses of right. We're in a situation now where if everybody used their entire license, we would take our rivers and streams way below the sustainable threshold. And in fact, just in this tiny little operational catchment of Suffolk Coastal, where we've done a bit of work, we've identified that if everyone took their full quantity, we would be pushing abstraction to about 16.7 megalitres per day below the sustainable limit. So the water's not really spare. It's needed. If we used it, there'd be trouble. The other thing about unused water not being spare water is this concept of headroom. Now, I think we're all fairly comfortable with the idea of water companies having a statutory levels of service. They can't just make us use standpipes. Thank you, Harriet, for planning that all for us. And part of that is that they need to have headroom in order to safeguard our supply. What we're not so familiar with, a lot of us, is irrigated agriculture and the requirement for headroom in that. I thought I'd show you a couple of potatoes. The one on the left is suffering from common scab, a side effect of insufficient irrigation, and the one on the right is perfectly marketable and saleable. Costs a lot of money to plant potatoes. If they can't sell them because they're covered in scab, you're potentially losing £5,000–6,000 per hectare, and that's how much it costs to plant those potatoes. So you cannot afford, if you're a potato grower, to run out of water halfway through the season. And so what they tend to do is plant according to their worst case needs. And worst case tends to be a 1 in 20 year drought. So that means that on an average year, they won't be using nearly as much water as they will in a license year, but they have to have the license that covers them for the 1 in 20 year drought. Now, if you combine that with the fact that you're not going to grow potatoes across your whole farm every year, rotation, you're probably only at the most going to have an average uptake of 60 to 70% of your license. Doesn't mean to say that 40 to 30% isn't essential. You have to have that. to protect you against the drought years and losses associated with insufficient irrigation. So that unused portion of license isn't necessarily spare for trading. Okay, let's have a look at some regulatory obstacles. We talked about the fact that the catchment is over abstracted. We also talked about the spatial difficulty, you know, license impacts are localized. And the Environment Agency has to take that into account when they're looking at trades. And so they published a trading and aggregation policy, I think it was December last year. And in effect, the most significant parts of that are that if you do a trade in an area where resources are limited, like East Suffolk, the donor license needs to be cut back to the average uptake from 2007 to 2012. There's also a presumption of moving that trade out of the water body. Now, these are pretty restrictive policies, and they do have a definite chilling effect, a very big chilling effect on trades. Let me show you a couple of examples of trades that we've tried to do in recent months, which have really come across, hit the buffers because of the need that the agency has to ensure water framework WFD compliance and avoid environmental damage. So the first one, here we're looking at the problems caused by the movement of the impact of the abstraction. So we've got an industrial producer, food producer, who needs an extra 100,000 cubic meters. They're abstracting from the confined chalk, and there's no more water available. So the environment tell them to look at the trading map. So they look at the trading map, trying to find someone who will sell them a water right. They expand, they can't find anyone in an immediate locality, so they expand their search out. And eventually, after contacting maybe 40 odd people, they find an abstractor, an agricultural abstractor, about 40 kilometers away, who's prepared to trade their license. Okay, you get a hit for the sustainability reduction. So the license was small anyway, but he can actually trade 25,000 cubic meters per year. The problem is, although he's still looking at a confined chalk to confined chalk, the agency point out that actually where the license is going to move to potentially impacts on the local river, the river box. And so they turn around and say, sorry guys, you can't trade out of catchment. Now the problem here is that within this catchment, it's only about 20 odd square kilometers. There are only there are a total of 4 groundwater licenses. 3 of those are too small to be worth looking at. And the third, despite being offered an eye-watering sum of money, wasn't happy to trade his license. Okay, let's look at sustainability reductions as an obstacle. An easier proposal on the face of things. We're moving a license maybe 500 meters from again groundwater abstraction to another groundwater abstraction. The problem here was that although the source licenses, the donor licenses, had a combined quantity of about 91,000 cubic meters, the average uptake between the critical threshold period 2007 to 2012 was very low. It was only 20,000 cubic meters. So that's the available quantity to trade under the EA trading rules. Now, this just wasn't sustainable. First of all, the 20,000 cubic meters wasn't enough for the buyer to move his irrigation to that site. And secondly, the losses involved were just too high for the seller to stomach. So there we are, 2 examples of where sustainability concerns mean that the trading hit the buffers. Okay, so how do we realize the benefits? You know, we know that there's a lot of value in water and that it is inefficient at the moment. Well, the first thing I'd do is say, okay, do we need to worry too much about it? Is action really required? Because actually there is a huge amount of trading going on. A lot of it's below the radar, but a lot of it's very obvious. So we have things like these multiple user collaborative schemes like the Felixstowe Hydrocycle project. And this photo here shows you, instead of pumping water out across the salt marsh into the estuary, we're now pumping it about 12 kilometres inland, sharing it with 6 farmers and potentially other people. We've got similar schemes on the go, one at Benacre and one at Chapelfield on the River Ant. And I think there are probably about half a dozen more similar schemes running in East Anglia. Trading also happens informally amongst irrigators. Most potato growers, carrot growers, lettuce growers will contract out their specialist service. So if you're growing potatoes, you're quite likely to be growing potatoes on your own farm, plus maybe half a dozen others. Same goes for carrots. Or you may have a contractor coming in and growing specialist crops on your farm. And in effect, what you're doing there is renting the water at the same time as the land. And so you're getting that sort of trading going on, although it's not necessarily a water trade. The water comes with the land. Neighbours often informally supply water to each other by pipeline, sometimes by putting it and taking it into the watercourse. That's very common in the fen system. And you also have virtual trades. So an example would be where you're an upstream abstractor and you pay a downstream abstractor a sum of money to relax the protection on their license, which allows you to take a bit more water. So there's a lot of informal trading going on already. It just doesn't register as a formal trade. The other question is that, do we really want to be taking action? Given that we're in a situation where we are over licensed, do we really want to be pushing the threshold, pushing the uptake, and potentially causing issues, certainly with Water Framework Directive, but basically looking at the impacts of the abstraction? Okay, so assuming that we do, and we want to realise those potential economic benefits of trade, the first things we need to do is look at removing those significant regulatory obstacles that I was talking about earlier. The first of these would be to look at the fairly swinging sustainability reductions that you go through. In other words, reduction of the donor license back to the 2007 to 2012 average. Now, unfortunately, the only way you can do that sustainably is to restore the whole system to a sustainable level. So I'm not necessarily advocating this, but what you need to do in order to get a proper marketplace is revoke and cut back a lot of licenses. The other thing we'd need to do to remove the regulatory obstacles is be a bit more relaxed about the spatial impact of abstraction. I'm not proposing any solutions, but maybe we do need to accept that we might have to, in order to facilitate trade, we may have to accept an uneven distribution of hydrological impacts. Finally, in order to realise these benefits, we need increased market transparency. People need to know who the buyers are, who the sellers are. They need access to them, and they need to know the value of their licenses. People are sitting on licenses not realising that they're sitting on hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of pounds worth of water. And that's where Simon's water source comes in. So finally, conclusion, there is a lot of unused license capacity in the system. The water has an incredibly high value. All right, not all of it's available for trade, but then a lot is. Problem is, there are big regulatory obstacles. and they're there for a reason. We can't trade willy-nilly without, at the moment, risking trashing the river system. But having said that, there's already a lot of informal trade going on. Problem is, the regulatory obstacles and difficulties do make formal trade very difficult. What we do need is a transparent multi-sector marketplace. So thank you very much. I think we were going to take questions at the end, and now I will hand over directly to Simon at WaterSource, who's been working with the Environment Agency, Essex and Suffolk Water and others, Water Resource East and all sorts of other people on the WaterSource platform. Simon, shall I hand over to you?
Yes, please, Paul. Yeah.
Here we go.
You need to unshare first. There you go.
There we go. Thank you.
Right. Share my screen. Yeah, hopefully everyone can see it. Well, first of all, I think I've actually just ended up on my last slide for some reason. Let me just shoot past up to the front. Hello, everybody, and it's fantastic to be able to talk to you and share about what we've been doing. I'm Simon Murray from the software company who is based in East Anglia, Weekly Solutions. We're a privately owned small software company. We've many years working with utilities. What I want to briefly share with you is the journey we've been on. A little bit the need for water sharing and a trade platform, and then introduce the actual platform itself. And there's been a side project which does relate still to water trade and sharing, called market information, and I'll come back to that when I get to those slides, because the term market information is very misleading. It doesn't really describe what it is. So the journey, very quickly, about almost 2 years ago now, before the current water companies' business plans were approved, what's called the PR19 process to get their business plans approved, there was a lot of discussion and talk around how much water companies water, called bulk transfers between each other, and that amount, that figure of bulk transfers hadn't changed or hadn't increased for many years, even though within the Ofwat model there was incentives to encourage more transfers between water companies. So I started having conversations with the likes of Ofwat around the concept for a cloud platform to communicate and perhaps use that communication to incentivize more transfers. The conversations quickly turned to a broader picture of eco-trade and secondary trade, and quite quickly lots of different elements of potentially environmental trade focused around water were raised and suggested, and it got to a point where we needed to try and prioritise the ideas that were coming through to focus on one or two and at least be able to move those forward. Conversations with stakeholders then kind of pointed the finger back to water and water sharing, but not between water companies, water sharing and trade between the other private abstraction license holders. And so in September 2019, we took the idea of water trade and sharing to Innovate East. It's an event that was run by Essex and Suffolk Water and Anglian Water, looking at innovation in not just the water industry, but with the environment and communities as well. And we run a dash on, well, okay, what are people's perceptions of trade? What do people think water trade mean? We had a whole range of stakeholders in the room, from the water companies to DEFRA to EA to abstractors to farming organisations like the NFU. I think there were some charity organisations there as well. We had a whole range of stakeholders, asking them what do they actually think water trade is, because there is a lot of terminology around it, and as Paul inferred, a lot of regulation which kind of drives terminology which many people may not be aware of. We also asked people to share trading experiences and to try and identify some common trade scenarios that we could then prioritise in the dash, in the event, and deep dive a little bit into exactly what happens today, how that trade event happened, what maybe need to happen. And the two that came out in the event itself was trade from storage, from stored water. So these are landowners, farmers who have invested their own money in building storage reservoirs to capture the water when there is plenty in the winter, or to fill it from their abstraction license, to give that extra risk mitigation in the summer. And then as the virtual trade concept around taking less upstream to deliver more downstream, or it could be the other way around. We spent time deconstructing it, but the key conclusion really from the day was there was strong support from all the stakeholders for more trade. There was strong support that the UK does need some form of digital hub or digital platform to support the trade and help identify opportunities and connect those interested in sharing and trading water. Again, as Paul mentioned, the legislation is quite complex, so there's a strong desire to have a system that maybe helped navigate that regulation to make sure people understood it, simplified it, and obviously adhered to any of the conditions that might be there. And so we thought it was very clear that there was a firm need. So our sort of discussions with the stakeholders leading up to the event, pointing the direction that water trade as an area to focus on, was kind of confirmed there is a need, but also obviously confirmed that there's a lot of complexities, and the challenge around making a successful market in the UK was substantial as well. The event itself allocated a chunk of money to various initiatives coming out of the event, and we managed to secure seed funding to run a 12-month pilot of a new platform. And that is the platform which is now called Weekly Water Source. So following the event, we've been engaging for the first 6 months or so very much with the various stakeholders. Just before COVID and lockdown hit us, we did manage to actually run another workshop in Snake Maltings over in East Anglia, again with a range of stakeholders in the room, to really kind of unpick the scenarios, the data needs, and you can see there in the middle image, we're going into quite a bit of detail in terms of mapping, what should happen, what would make this a success. We've been working with a number of people, obviously raising some of the distractors. We have Northumbrian Water, who own Essex and Suffolk involved as well, Anglian Water, Water Resources Group, the Environment Agency, they're absolutely key in terms of giving us obviously their expertise, advice and access to data. And then there's the likes of NSU and SFLAG and Tractor groups we've been working with to build and understand the requirements and how we can add value through this platform. So the Water Trade platform actually went live on the 1st of December in terms of the pilot. And there's 4 elements to the platform. The first concept was to create a map that we could share information with a map-based interface that made it easier to use, navigate and locate information where the user is located. So for the proof of concept and the pilots, the catchment browser, as we're calling it at the moment, allows a user to drill down geographically from river basin all the way down to water body, switch between types of water body, groundwater, surface water, within the pilot area, and associated with that water body, the licenses within it, and access what is public information around the license. And as a demonstrator, we're also then picking up the Water Framework Directive overall status for that water body. And it is a demonstrator. We could share and give access to lots of other information in there, but as a pilot, what we didn't want to do is kind of throw lots of things at it and make it very difficult to navigate and understand. So we're now actively seeking feedback on the next priorities in terms of data hosting and sharing. We have had some suggestions, whether it's around river flows or current river flows, water levels for groundwater, all those things we're collecting as potential things to host within this catchment browser. The other key part of it was obviously advertising. This is for people that may be wanting water to shout, hey, I'm in this area, I'm located here, I need water now, or I might need water in the future, or I'm very interested in exploring how I get an alternative source of water. So, this is not just about abstractors that are trading with other abstractors. There's other large landowners who might need water, who are currently buying expensive public water, treated public water unnecessarily to irrigate it, could be golf courses and things like that. So they may be really interested in exploring an alternative, for them lower cost, but also hopefully a more environmentally sustainable source of water, when water companies themselves, as Harriet said right at the start, obviously have their own challenges about meeting public water for drinking. Then it also allows abstractors to obviously publish and that they're willing to consider and discuss sharing. Okay, that doesn't mean sharing right now, it could mean sharing in 6 months' time, or in one case we do have a farmer who's posted a really interesting case study in that he wants to build a new reservoir because it's in a particular area that has difficulties and challenges already. He can't get a new license to fill that reservoir. So he's posted an advert to say, is there any abstractors nearby willing to maybe help me fill the storage when it might be built in November at the end of this year? And then obviously once it's built and filled, then we can discuss mutual sharing of that water. Interesting concept to help the environment, provide a new water source in a sustainable way. So it's very much about connecting and shouting about needs. And then at the moment within the water source, it's kind of reliant on those guys connecting and having the chat. Don't waste time, don't fill in forms or do complex things on the system. Just have a chat and just see, are you really serious? Is this really feasible between us? Are we close enough to make this work? Can we actually transfer the water? Once they believe it is a serious thing to explore and take to the next level, within water source, we then do what's called creating opportunities. So you match the donor and the recipient post, so the donor being the person with the abstraction license who can provide water, either from the abstraction point itself or maybe their private storage, and then the recipient, the person who wants it. And then what we've done is within the information we've got on licenses, within the information users care and provide when they register, we then agreed with the Environment Agency a series of rules to assess that opportunity. Give a very high level assessment that will indicate against the licenses and the environmental regulations today whether trade can just go ahead, and it's a concept that's being called fast trade. It's in the same areas for the same purpose, for example. You don't need to apply for a variation to license. You don't need to apply for a new license. It's not a water rights trade. So you can go ahead, you can be confident to go ahead. And so you can see on the screen there, all of the traffic lights are green. The assessment then also obviously indicates where there may be slight conflicts in terms of the rules. And what it does is give you freedom then, the donor recipient can have a conversation to maybe tweak what they're looking to share and when to make it comply with the regulations. So the periods in terms of when the recipient wants the water might not quite align with when the donor can provide it. But tweaking that in terms of, for the recipient's perspective, that might be acceptable. They may be able to take water at a slightly different time and it still meets what they want. So they can have a discussion before kind of closing the opportunity and saying, well, we're just not going to pursue it. They can at least maybe have a discussion, see if there's opportunity to change the arrangement slightly to make it work. Obviously, at the end of the day, there's always going to be cases where the actual events, the ability to trade or share water does require referral to the EA, particularly for a variation to license. So, for example, if the recipient needs water for a different purpose to that's what the donor has on their license, then the donor, the abstraction license holder, might need to apply for variation to the license to add a new purpose to their license to allow that to happen. So, and quite a bit of a first really for the UK is what WaterSource does is actually helps submit pre-application to the Environment Agency. Once you hit the button to refer to the agency, you are asked for more information to complete pre-application based on the existing Environment Agency forms that are available through their website. It's only for pre-application, but at least it will allow you to provide that to the EA permitting office and get a fairly quick kind of response back in terms of what may need to be done, whether this is likely to happen or not. And so it helps, avoid wasted time. Within the platform, there's a dashboard. What we're trying to do, obviously, is not just help trade happen. We want to also capture learning. So that's not just that trade has happened, but also why trade has not happened. So again, we're asking for information around why an opportunity wasn't taken to an actual point of sharing. It could be, the transfer of water is an issue. It could be the regulations were an issue, or it could be just one of the parties pulled out for whatever reason. So again, we're trying to capture that information and that learning. Why trade hasn't happened is just as important. We're also careful about who sees what information. So the dashboard you see there is at a high level. It's looking at trades in the pilot area as a whole. It's you can't, as a general user, drill down to an individual event, and no information really on an individual event is going to be sent anywhere, for example, to the Environment Agency, unless the actual donor and recipient want to actually apply for a variation and obviously voluntarily send the information to the Environment Agency. So when fast trade happens, we know it happens and we know how much water is traded, etc. But it is aggregated. It kind of touches back what Paul was saying in terms of there's a lot of trade already going on. And what we're trying to do with this system is encourage users to use the system to track it, so that there is a degree of visibility of it. Again, that visibility doesn't mean individual events will be shared publicly. Very hot off the press, and I think this is probably the first event we're actually going to communicate it publicly, but very soon the pilot area is actually going to expand. So the dark blue area you can see there is the current pilot area that went live on the 1st of December. Light blue area is the area which we're going to expand into. We're literally just hosting and uploading the abstraction license data, and once that's done, it will be available for license holders in the area to register an account, claim their licenses, and obviously participate in this pilot. It covers the Carrum and Ely, Bordens Rivers, Essex, and the Suffolk East management catchments. Very briefly, I mentioned this is kind of the second in parallel pilot to this, and it's work we started with Anglian and now involves Essex, Suffolk, and Northumbrian water, and it relates to what's being called market information. It's a regulatory requirement for water companies to publish and share information on the supply and demand challenges over the next 25 years. So in essence, the demand deficit of supply and water. At the moment, they are a spreadsheet template all companies have to use, published on their website for each water resource zone. Very messy, not very easy to understand, not particularly a friendly way of communicating. So what we have done, and this is the landing page on the platform when you go in, it's an open area giving access to this information for those water companies, where you can click on one of their water resource zones. There's a RAG status in terms of the supply demand risk in the area for the next 25 years. And then you can get an infographic which year by year will show what that is. And also within that, there's then opportunity for third parties to get in touch with the water company to either raise a query, but more importantly, to offer assistance. So hand in hand with market information is what's called the bid assessment framework, which is specifically to allow third parties to offer assistance. At the moment, for these water companies, the majority of offers are from abstractors offering water to the water company. So that's why there's a strong link between the trade and sharing elements and the market information. So both these areas went live at the same time on the 1st of December. And there is another water company very soon joining this area of the platform as well. I probably won't mention it right now, but hopefully in a few weeks or months' time, you'll see another water company joining this element of the platform. That's kind of a quick overview of the weekly solution. Obviously, if people do want more detail or visualization of it, actually you can go to our website under the products page. There are lots of Q&As around these two areas. There's also video demonstrations of the platform for trade and marketing information, so you can get a lot more information and an idea out of that. Obviously, I'm always happy to receive any reach outs or questions. So, Harriet, I think we are on to the Q&A bit.
Yes, thank you, Simon.
Let's try and share.
Thank you, Paul. Yep, so we've had some questions come in. So I'll start going through those. So the first one, so this one's for Paul. Oh, lost it. So Paul, has much attention been given to the annual cyclicity in water availability and drought wet years when considering trading rules and defining headroom?
You know, I love this question because it's exactly what I've been asking the agency. No, not much consideration has been given to it at all. I think to be fair to the agency, what they've had to do is take quite a precautionary approach. But actually, in terms of looking at the average uptake, no, what's happening is that the licenses are being capped at the average between 2007 and 2012, and no account really is being taken of allowing these annual peaks to coincide, peaks and abstractions to coincide with drought. And what I would love to see is more consideration of this, and to have some sort of licensing system where you can afford to take those peaks. So yeah, great question.
Thanks, Paul. Another one for you. Can and how might effluent reuse fit into water trading?
Again, it's a great question. I know a lot of farmers would be interested in taking effluent straight out of the pipe, holding it in a reservoir for a bit, and then using it for irrigation. At the moment, the abstraction licensing system, as you know, looks at the consumptive demand of or the consumptive use of an abstraction. So if you're putting effluent back into the system, the consumptive use is lower. Now, if you were selling that on to a farmer or another abstractor, then your consumptive use would grow, and so there would be regulatory concerns there. But certainly, it's something that needs to be addressed as a whole in the system.
Quickly on that, just also share that there are some water companies themselves who are obviously piloting water reuse, trying to avoid the term effluents and treated effluents. So there are a few companies who are piloting pilots around that. And yeah, we have half spoken to some of those companies around obviously water source being a single platform for this kind of trade and sharing to communicate those pilots, communicate the areas in which trading in that water reuse is realistic. So it's definitely something on the radar for the platform to help communicate where those schemes are and obviously facilitate interest, as it were.
Great, thank you both. So next one, what about water trading between water companies? Does it follow the same rules, or is it deemed more essential as it's a public health supply? Obviously, I am from a water company, but I haven't been at that business end down in the nitty-gritty of trading, so I don't actually know whether the rules apply the same or not. Paul, do you have an answer to that?
We have limited experience of people trying to buy wholesale from water company, and the water companies told us that they will be subject to the same sustainability reductions on the base licenses. So that's something actually we need to question. But at the moment, the feedback I'm getting, very limited, is that water companies will be subject to the same sustainability reductions for a trade.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, maybe someone from the Environment Agency can confirm that.
Yeah. One for Simon. So, has there or will there be any impact assessment of whether the tool will increase or decrease the pressure on the licensed abstraction values that are not currently taken up? Can existing license conditions control the market in the short term?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. I think right now, in terms of the pilot, it's at the stage where we are trying to encourage use and encourage more visibility of the trade rather than trying to address the market value at the moment. I think that there's a number of very big challenges, and the first challenge is visibility of that trade, and giving people the comfort and the confidence that if they share the information, then it's going to be handled in the right way. So the platform at the moment, in terms of financial value of water and what money is changing hands, for example, is actually a voluntary basis within the pilot right now. It's definitely on the horizon. It's definitely something we want to look at, but it's not quite within the scope of this particular phase of the project.
Thanks, Simon. And another one for you. So, is water source only set up for more permanent trades, or could it be used in dry or drought years to help facilitate trades just for that year?
Yes, it would be, yeah, absolutely. It's not, the trade can be temporary, it can be permanent. We're not ruling out maybe some sort of long-term agreement in terms of sharing at a particular time each year. All of those things are kind of included. The system doesn't exclude anything really at the moment. It connects to donor and recipient. It does some analysis and some checks around compliance of that trade, whether it's allowed or permitted or not. It doesn't put any time constraints on that trade at all. In fact, as a pilot, we are asking attractors if they have had experience recently, last year or the last 12 months of a trade, if they are willing to invest the time, then there's absolutely nothing stopping them backdating that event in the system to put it through the system, to help test the platform, but also obviously give us valuable insights.
Thanks, Simon. So this comment, so the platform solution presented looks like a good step forward and user-friendly, but the problems in the first presentation still remain. Essentially, we need to make some strategic decisions about the future of water abstraction, maybe looking for innovative ways to reduce big abstractor demand on our freshwater resources, to free up resources for smaller abstractors to trade in this way. What is the speaker's view? I'm not sure whether this is for Simon or Paul, but
I'll go quickly first because I'm not a hydrologist or a technical person. What we do know is from the Innovate East event, there was strong support for local storage and more local storage. And so one of kind of the side goals of the water source project is to see if we can, in a way, encourage consideration of developing more local storage. It does open another can of worms in terms of funding and are there grants available. That's the usual challenge that you get. But it was seen to be very strong in East Anglia that as a potential mitigation in the future is local storage. Have you got anything else to add, Paul?
Yeah, thanks. I think the question's about, okay, how can we help or reduce demand on big abstractors, and that's basically public water supply. And I think it's something that I know Ofwat and the Environment Agency and water companies are working towards, but at the moment that's not going to release enough water to make trading available. I noticed one of the questions coming through was, okay, we're using 55% of our licensed quantity, but how much do we need to reduce abstraction really to make it sustainable? At the moment, we don't know. We've done some work with the agency to try and establish that, and we know in this small Suffolk coastal area, it's about a 20% reduction on licenses, give or take. So when looking at these big strategic things, what we have to do first really is try and get back to a sustainable situation. And yep, if we can reduce some of those really big abstractions, that will help. We also need to reduce abstractions from the small abstractors. Once we're at a sustainable situation, then there will be a much more open and free market for trading. But at the moment, when you have to have those regulatory controls to ensure sustainability, the market is, sadly, it's going to be skewed.
Thank you. One for Simon. When considering trades within catchments, does the dashboard have the facility to cope with complex level managed areas? Because we have some of those in our region.
Probably the simple straight answer is not right now. It's something that in terms of requirements hasn't actually been raised with us until now. Obviously, yes, it could, but it is a pilot and a proof of concept running for 12 months. So there's always going to be a number of things it doesn't do today which people might think are valuable. What we're asking for is to make sure those ideas and those thoughts come to us and shared with us. So we can include that in 6 months' time, 12 months' time, the results of the trial. We can include those considerations.
Thank you. So Paul, I think this one's for you. Oh, I've lost it. Oh, it's disappeared off my list.
Phew.
That was the real tough one, Paul.
Okay, another question for Paul. Isn't the key to opening up trading the IT solution being demonstrated rather than regulatory relaxation to the extent that it causes environmental harm and also potentially harm to other local abstractions being derogated from the recipient of increased volumes?
Yes, sure. We can't have trading which causes Water Framework Directive fails or river fails. So I think, as I said in one of my slides, that is a major obstacle. So ideally what we need to be doing is taking a strategic approach and saying, okay, how can we return to a sustainable system where we can allow trading within sustainable limits? So yeah, Craig is absolutely right. The solution is to have a really good trading platform, but before that can work freely, we need to establish sustainable limits. We need to have the freedom to trade without those big regulatory obstacles that currently the agency has to impose in order to comply with Water Framework Directive and ensure sustainable abstraction.
Okay, thank you. So another one. So currently the UK is not short of water for all demands. However, it is managed badly and seriously lacking in infrastructure. We dump more water into the sea in any year than we use in agriculture, and yet we are not being assisted to get our hands on it. The trading platform is a useful tool, but do you think that it will be anywhere suitable to fix that problem?
I think it'll definitely help, because what we're seeing at the moment is things like the Felixstowe Hydrocycle project, which is where we're taking 600,000 cubic meters of water from the discharge point, pumping it inland to half a dozen farmers for storage, and we're looking at duplicate schemes like that. But the problem is, they're really capital intensive, and farmers whilst, you know, some of them are quite well off, they can't really stretch to that. So they do need help. Now, the reason Felix de Hydrocycle scheme went ahead was because we got European funding, about 50% of the capital costs. That's the sort of level that we probably need in order to promote lookalike schemes. And we've got people interested sort of, you know, up and down the East Anglian coast. But the capital investment is just at the moment a bit too high without help. So we need that. And then once you've got those schemes in place, the trading platform really will help, because you'll have a group of farmers or a mini water supply company who'll be able to look at the customer demand, and you know, it'll help them cover the capital costs. So yeah.
Thank you. And do you see the cost of trading and the greater appreciation of the real value of water helping to drive efficiency and overall reduction in water use?
Is that one for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as DEFRA pointed out when they did their economic impact assessment, one of the big failings of the abstraction license system at the moment is that it doesn't recognise the value of water. Okay, individual farmers know how valuable it is. Businesses who are running short of water know how valuable it is. The more trading we have, the more market information available, the wider that understanding gets out. So yeah, when people realise that a licence is worth £10 per cubic metre roughly, they will look after it more.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I think all the questions now have either been answered or covered by other answers, and I think it's probably tea time. So yes, thank you so much to Paul and Simon for their presentations. I think that was really interesting, really educational. I learned some things that'll help me in my job. So yes, thank you very much. This session is being recorded, so you can watch it again on the CIWEM YouTube page. And yeah, thank you very much for joining, and have a look at the CIWEM events page for future events, and keep an eye out for our branch's future events as well. Thank you very much.